Hey y'all, hey. Today we are reading The Long Silk Strand, a grandmother's legacy to her granddaughter. Long ago, when samurai were not yet legends, there lived a girl named Yasuyo. Yasuyo lived in a small house with her mother and father, younger brother Kikuzo, and grandmother. One night, after the rice bowls had been wiped clean, grandmother brought out a large bag full of silk threads. Piece by piece, grandmother tied each thread together and wound the resulting longer strand into a ball. Yasuyo sat down beside the old woman and asked, "Grandmother, what is the thread for? Are you going to weave cloth for my new kimono?" Kimono? Grandmother shook her head. For each thread she tied on, grandmother told Yasuyo a story from her long life. One story began, "This thread is for the time I visited my grandmother above the clouds." Another story began, "This thread is for the time I met your grandfather." And another story began, "This thread is for the time your mother was born." Thread by thread, story by story, the ball of silk grew. The first night, the ball was the size of a teacup. By the 10th night, the ball was the size of a small blowfish. And by the 100th night, the ball was as big as a bamboo basket. You finished eating? You finished eating?
Yeah. Mommy.
Hmm?
The almost up there.
Get it?
With my hand.
Yeah. The night finally came when grandmother was too weak to tie the threads together and wind them around the giant ball. So Yasuyo helped her. As she tied, Yasuyo asked, "What is this piece for?" Grandmother whispered,
Mommy.
"This thread is for tonight, when I tell you I love you."
Mommy, I gotta go.
You what?
I gotta go.
You do?
Yeah. But how about the
All right. The next morning, mother told Yasuyo that grandmother had died in her sleep. Yasuyo cried and looked for the giant ball of silk to keep as a memory of grandmother, but it was nowhere to be found. Finally, she went outside, and there, in the middle of the garden, a strand of silk thread made up of many shorter pieces hung down from the sky. Puzzled, Yasuyo tugged on the strand, but it held firm. She pulled harder, but the thread would not break. Cairo, shh, it's story time.
Okay. Mommy, how about the bed?
Yasuyo began to climb the long silk strand. She climbed above the rooftops, but still the thread reached higher. She climbed above the trees, but still the thread reached higher. Soon she climbed above the soaring kites, but still the thread reached even higher. Finally, she climbed through the clouds. When she reached the top of the clouds, she found the end of the thread and her grandmother waiting for her.
Mommy, Mama, why my hand too sticky?
Probably because you got syrup on them. Go wash your hands. Why didn't you use your fork?
I just use my hand
Cairo,
Huh?
slow down. You just use your hands to what?
To the I don't know.
Yasuyo wrapped her arms around the old woman and said, "Now that I have found you, I will stay with you always." Grandmother nodded. "You can stay with me if you wish, granddaughter, But let us say goodbye to Mother and Father and Kikuzo. Please move back.
Yeah, Mommy.
The clouds parted, and Yasuyo and Grandmother looked down at Father in his boat. He dove into the water. A few moments later, he came up with a sack full of oysters, which he dumped into the bottom of the boat. After climbing aboard, he picked up one large oyster and said,
Yuck.
"This one I will save for Yasuyo.
Yuck.
I know she loves
Mommy,
pearls, and this
yuck.
oyster looks like it holds a beauty."
Mommy, look.
I see.
Who bet that?
You.
No, brother.
Yasuyo smiled from the clouds. She would miss Father, but she had promised Grandmother she would stay with her always.
Mommy,
Yes.
about the guy?
Is she gonna stay in the sky?
Yes,
I don't know. Let's read to find out.
yes.
Next, Yasuyo and Grandmother looked down at Mother making rice balls. Putting two large ones aside, Mother said, "I will save these for Yasuyo. I know she loves them, and she is such a good girl." Yasuyo smiled from the clouds. She would miss Mother, but she had promised Grandmother she would stay with her always. Finally, Yasuyo and Grandmother looked down at Kikuzo walking in the garden. "Yasuyo," he called. "Yasuyo, where are you?" "I am here," called Yasuyo from the clouds. "Kikuzo cannot hear you," said Grandmother. "He will be lonely without you." "But I promised I would stay with you always," said Yasuyo. Unlock that door.
Open the door.
"You will be with me always. All my memories of you are tied into this," replied Grandmother, tugging on the long silk thread that still hung down through the clouds. "I will never forget you." "But Grandmother," said Yasuyo, "I will miss you." Grandmother snapped a piece of thread off the end of the long silk strand and handed it to Yasuyo. "Shh. Here," she said. "Now you will never forget me or be without me."
Mommy,
Yes.
why both of the guy?
Because the grandmother passed away and Yasuyo went up there to visit her. Yasuyo took the piece of thread and hugged her grandmother for the last time. "Please get down." Slowly, she climbed back down the long silk strand made of many shorter pieces of thread. As she passed down over each knot, the piece above her disappeared as if it had been a dream. She climbed down through the clouds, then below the soaring kites, and below the trees and the rooftops, until she dropped into the garden behind her house. If I just asked him to get down, why would you climb up?
How did I'll do and put it down?
Please get down right now.
Me?
Yasuyo looked up. The long silk strand her grandmother had tied together, thread by thread, story by story, was gone. She looked at the piece of thread her grandmother had given her, and she smiled.
No.
Someday, when she was a grandmother and rolling her own ball of silk threads, she would say to her grandchild, "This thread is for the time I visited my grandmother above the clouds."
I got to draw.
That book is for writing, not drawing.
Where's my book?
The end. The long silk strand.
Mommy, where's my